A convoy comprising 24 vehicles and nearly 100 Russian soldiers was eliminated from the troop roster in less than an hour. This was not the result of long-range artillery or million-dollar guided missiles, but rather a strike from ultra-low-cost suicide drones, FPV. A paradox emerges when a large-scale reinforcement formation is systematically destroyed in broad daylight, despite claims regarding Russia's electronic suppression capabilities. On the Pokrovsk front, the thick fog, initially expected to act as a protective shield, inadvertently became a battlefield-shaping factor in Ukraine's favor. This reality proves that in modern warfare, speed is no longer synonymous with safety. To clearly understand the root cause of this tragedy, one must look deep into the risky trade-off decisions made by the Russian side from the very moment the convoy began to roll. On the Pokrovsk front, where the tempo of combat is at a high intensity, time pressure forced Russian commanders to make highly risky trade-off decisions. The selection of a mixed formation structure, comprising unarmored troop transport trucks, accompanied by a handful of light armored vehicles, reflects an intent to optimize reinforcement speed rather than prioritize protection. In their battlefield risk management mindset, Russia accepted sacrificing vigilance in exchange for the capability to deploy troops into key positions before the adversary could consolidate their defensive lines. However, moving a large formation of 24 vehicles along a single route transformed this entire unit into a critical vulnerability, a single point of failure. Once this sole route was damaged or blocked, the unit's entire mobility would be completely neutralized. To compensate for the lack of armor, Russia utilized the thick early morning fog as a natural shield to blind Ukraine's satellites and optical surveillance equipment. This was a technical decision, based on the calculation that limited visibility would reduce the effectiveness of enemy reconnaissance drones. However, this trade-off created a direct consequence on the ability to control the formation. The limited visibility forced drivers to tailgate each other at close range to avoid straying from the line, resulting in an extremely dangerous formation compression phenomenon. Under modern combat conditions, maintaining a high density of vehicles within a narrow space goes against the principle of force dispersion, inadvertently creating favorable conditions for precision weapons to inflict maximum damage. The weakest link in the Russian convoy's defense system was the complete lack of mobile electronic warfare equipment and anti-drone nets on the soft-skinned transport vehicles. While heavy armored units are typically prioritized for equipping with jamming systems, the troop transport trucks were left almost naked against aerial threats. This complacency may have stemmed from underestimating the adversary's ability to maintain radio discipline and coordinate firepower in adverse weather conditions. The Russian crews seemingly placed their absolute trust in the fog, forgetting that Ukraine's modern thermal sensors could easily penetrate these physical barriers. Furthermore, the tactical mindset of the crews also reflected a lack of preparation for an FPV drone ambush scenario. Tailgating each other on a narrow road, with a deep ditch on one side and elevated terrain on the other, effectively sealed off all escape routes for the convoy. When moving in a compressed formation, any incident occurring to the lead vehicle would create a cascade effect on all the vehicles behind it. Instead of maintaining spacing to minimize risks, the impatience in delivering reinforcements led the Russian convoy into a spatial trap that Ukraine had quietly prepared in advance. It was Ukraine's decisions in shaping the battlefield that thoroughly exploited the flaws in Russia's operational logic, transforming a reinforcement march into an irreversible military tragedy. In contrast to the impatience of the Russian reinforcement efforts, the Ukrainian military adopted a patient tactical approach and seized the initiative in shaping the battlefield. Instead of launching strikes as soon as the first enemy vehicles were detected, Ukraine deployed high-altitude reconnaissance drone groups to establish a continuous surveillance network. This decision allowed drone control units to deeply analyze the enemy's operational rhythm, from average speed to resting points or locations where the convoy was forced to decelerate due to terrain. This was a crucial preparatory phase aimed at precisely identifying choke points where the strength of a large formation would become a burden to itself. Ukraine's patience was accompanied by a highly risky strategic trade-off. By allowing the Russian convoy to advance deep into their fire control zone without immediately opening fire, Ukraine accepted the possibility that the adversary might successfully reinforce if subsequent attacks did not achieve the expected effectiveness. However, within Ukraine's military mindset, this risk was necessary to achieve the goal of total annihilation rather than merely inflicting minor damage. Waiting until the convoy entered the most ideal stretch of road, featuring a deep ditch on one side and elevated terrain on the other, transformed a public road into an invisible funnel. Here, turning vehicles around or dispersing the formation became physically impossible, turning the entire convoy into a static target awaiting the finishing blow. During this process, Ukraine's drone combat units demonstrated strict radio discipline to maintain the element of surprise. Maintaining minimal communication channels and utilizing variable frequency bands helped their drones remain hidden from Russia's long-range electronic reconnaissance systems. Ukraine not only used drones as an attack tool but also as a means to manipulate the psychology and behavior of the adversary. They pre-identified damaged road sections and large potholes where Russian vehicles would be forced to slow down, thereby establishing preset coordinates for suicide FPV squads. The coordination between Ukraine's reconnaissance and strike units was executed based on a rigorous combat algorithm. When the Russian convoy entered the predetermined area, the FPV squads did not launch simultaneously, but rather in calculated waves. The objective was not random destruction, but to create a forced halt at the most critical location. Ukraine clearly understood that in a mechanized marching formation, simply neutralizing the lead vehicle at an impassable position would create a single point of failure for the entire system behind it. This is precisely the art of using geographical space to amplify the power of low-tech weapons, turning Russia's numerical superiority in soldiers into uncontrollable chaos. Ukraine's calculation was also based on exploiting the rupture in the enemy's command system when taken by surprise. By letting the convoy advance deep into the kill zone, Ukraine severed the possibility of fire support from Russia's rear echelon, leaving the reinforcement unit completely isolated amidst a hostile geographical space. Ukraine's trade-off between time and firepower effectiveness ultimately yielded optimal results, as the entire Russian formation was trapped in a pre-staged scenario. This meticulous preparation established the premise for an irreversible systemic collapse when the first FPVs began to dive down onto their targets, transitioning decisively from static observation to dynamic destruction. The collapse of the Russian convoy began with a strike symbolic of precision warfare techniques, the headlocking blow. As the lead armored vehicle reached the narrowest section of the topographical funnel, a Ukrainian FPV executed a dive with a near-vertical trajectory. The direct impact transformed the lead vehicle into a burning mass of steel, immediately creating an impassable physical obstacle. In military terminology, this vehicle transitioned from a mobility asset into a critical vulnerability, a single point of failure for the entire artery behind it. The abrupt halt of the spearhead in limited visibility conditions due to fog triggered a devastating cascade effect upon the tightly compressed formation. The compression effect occurred almost instantaneously. The second vehicle braked hard to avoid a collision, but the third and fourth vehicles behind it, due to maintaining too short a distance to preserve visual contact, slammed directly into each other's rear ends. In a split second, all tactical spacing, which was the sole layer of protection against area of effect firepower, completely vanished. The 2-4 vehicle convoy was now huddled together into a massive, static target, incapable of self-defense on a road sandwiched between a deep ditch and elevated terrain. The on-site command structure was paralyzed, as the crews could neither advance nor retreat, nor could they deploy the formation to the sides to establish defensive fire positions. As soon as the target was immobilized, Ukraine commenced the systematic destruction phase with a rain of FPVs. Ukrainian drone control units did not attack chaotically. They coldly executed target selection based on military value priorities. The troop-filled transport trucks, inherently lacking armor protection and completely devoid of mobile electronic warfare systems, became prime targets. One by one, the FPVs dove into the truck beds, where large numbers of Russian soldiers were concentrated. The lack of personal jamming devices and anti-drone nets on the transport vehicles allowed each aerial strike to achieve near-absolute destructive efficiency. The battlefield reality descended into chaos as the tactical morale of the Russian soldiers collapsed under the pressure of the screeching drone motors. Many soldiers decided to jump from their vehicles, attempting to seek safety beneath the undercarriages or in the drainage ditches along the road. However, this was an error in judgment when facing an overhead surveillance force. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones, operating at a safe altitude, clearly recorded every hiding coordinate. Concentrating soldiers beneath the vehicles inadvertently created clustered targets for subsequent FPV waves, turning the very vehicles they were hiding under into death traps when the fuel and ammunition inside detonated. A few vehicles in the middle of the convoy attempted to break away by plunging into the muddy fields on either side of the road. However, the trade-off between abandoning the hard-surfaced route and terrain risks yielded negative results. The heavy trucks quickly became bogged down deep in the mud, turning into defenseless static pillboxes. Here, spatial isolation and the loss of connection with the main formation turned them into target practice for the Ukrainian drone squads continuously rotating to recharge and rearm. The systemic collapse reached its climax as secondary explosions from fuel and ammunition began to occur along the length of the convoy. Thick pillars of black smoke billowed high. Initially appearing to be an effective smokescreen to blind the enemy, they actually backfired in practice. In modern warfare, a wall of smoke might obscure optical vision but becomes an extremely clear guiding signal for Ukraine's thermal sensor-equipped drones. The very heat emitted from the fires and from the bodies of the panicking soldiers helped Ukraine maintain its precise attack tempo even when the battlefield was cloaked in smoke and fog. The battle concluded not with a direct infantry firefight between the two sides, but with the terrifying silence of a burnt-out convoy on a desolate stretch of road, leaving behind blood-soaked lessons regarding the obsolescence of large-scale marches, lacking the protection of electronic warfare and short-range air defenses. The battle at Pokrovsk is a costly testament to the landmark shift in the nature of modern warfare, where mobility has been ruthlessly neutralized by comprehensive surveillance. This reality demonstrates that a narrow road under continuous drone observation becomes a lethally dangerous zone that no amount of armor or movement speed can protect against. Maintaining large marching formations is no longer a display of strength, but an excessively risky trade-off in terms of personnel and equipment. This event forces Russia and military powers worldwide to redefine their mindset regarding battlefield risk management. The inevitable change will lean towards maximum formation dispersion to prevent cascade effects when under attack. Heavy transport vehicles may have to give way to light, high-speed vehicles such as quad bikes in order to minimize the target exposure area and increase flexibility across complex terrain. Simultaneously, electronic warfare cannot merely remain at the level of unit equipment, but must become mandatory personal gear, ensuring that radio discipline is maintained at the highest level to eliminate any single point of failure that the adversary could exploit. The question arises, will the explosion in the massive number of drones render large-scale marches impossible in the future? Or will we witness a new arms race for autonomous ground escort robotic systems aimed at countering the threat from the air? These are the challenges that every military force must resolve if they wish to survive in the era of transparent warfare. What do you think about Russia still accepting the movement of large formations despite knowing that the sky always has eyes? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming in-depth analyses of the Ukrainian battlefield.